Israel Adesanya and Joe Pyfer are headlining UFC Fight Night this Saturday in Seattle, and I think people are looking at this fight the wrong way. I don't think this is just a veteran versus prospect matchup, but I feel like this is a crossroads moment for Israel Adesanya, and on the other hand, a potential fast track to stardom for Joe Pyfer. And almost every time you've got that kind of pressure on both sides, weird things start to happen. So let's not waste some more time and just break this down. Everyone knows who Israel Adesanya is. He's a two-time middleweight champion. He defended his belt 5 consecutive times over the span of 3 years. He's tied for the most knockdowns in middleweight history, and he's tied for the longest win streak at middleweight at 12. But now he's in a completely different position that he's never been in before. He's coming off 3 straight losses to top-level competition in Nasruddin Imavov, DDP, and Sean Strickland. Even though those losses came against elite fighters, literally number 1, 2, and 3 in the division, it still changes how you look at him. He's no longer viewed as the guy that everyone is chasing. He's now somebody that's just in the rankings and has to prove that he still belongs and that he's still elite. That's why this matchup exists. The UFC makes matchups like this to answer 2 questions. Either question 1, is fighter A still elite? In this case, fighter A is Israel Adesanya. And then question 2, is fighter B ready right now? In this case, this is Joe Pyfer. Now that we're talking about Joe Pyfer, we might as well just get into him, because if you don't understand what he brings, you can completely misread this fight. Joe Pyfer is not a slow, technical, point-fighting striker. He's not someone who's just trying to win rounds. He is trying to take your head off your shoulders and end this fight early. He's explosive, he has crazy power, and he's willing to take risks early to make something happen. From the opening seconds of the fight, he's dangerous. And that's what makes him a real problem when you're coming off of 3 straight losses. That's the last thing you want, is someone who's going to force you to react immediately. He's not going to give Adesanya time to settle in, and he's definitely not going to sit at range and play a technical striking match. And he's going to get up there, he's going to go get in towards the distance on Izzy. He's going to throw with intent, and he's going to try to create chaos extremely early. Now, on the other side of this, at his best, Izzy is one of the cleanest strikers we ever seen in MMA. His entire game is built on distance management, feints, and elite counters. When he's in control, everything just looks effortless. It's just smooth like a hot knife cutting butter. But a really important detail I think people overlook a little bit is how counter striking isn't automatic. I think it's more situational than people give it credit for. I think it depends on the situation. Adesanya's counter game is at its best when it has space, time, and he's already made reads on his opponent. He's not someone who just reacts. He's someone who likes to set traps, and then when you fall into those traps, he likes to punish you for that. And that's really what this fight comes down to. Can Adesanya establish control before Pyfer disrupts him? Because there are 2 completely different outcomes of this fight that can happen here. If Joe Pyfer comes in reckless, just running forward and throwing big shots with no setup, he's going to get picked apart. That's the easiest version of this fight for Izzy, and that's how you get countered, that's how you get frustrated, and that's how Izzy just reminds everyone who he actually is. But, on the other hand, if Joe Pyfer applies smart pressure, everything changes. If he's closing the distance with intent, mixing up his entries and not giving up clean reads, then Adesanya doesn't have to settle. He doesn't have time to get settled in early. Now he has to defend before he can counter, and now the fight becomes about surviving first, adjusting second, and then controlling later. And that's not where Izzy likes to fight. Because we've seen recently that Adesanya gets pressured and he can't settle immediately. He looks human. I'm not going to say he looks washed or he looks bad. I don't think that's true, or I don't think he's washed at all. I don't think that's the case. But what I will say is he's 110% more vulnerable than what he used to be. This is where we need to go on a deeper level, because this might be one of the most important, whole deciding factors of this fight. What happens if Joe Pyfer actually hurts him early? Bad. I'm not saying just what if he lands, snaps his head back with a jab. I'm saying what if he really hurts him, noticeably wobbled. Earlier in his career, Izzy showed that he could fight through that kind of moment in fights like Kevin Gastelum. He got rocked, fired back immediately, and he was willing to stand in chaos and respond. But more recently, we've seen a version of him nowadays. When he gets pressured or put in danger, he's more defensive. He shells up and he like retreats and just starts circling around like a lot. And there are moments where he hesitates and instead of like just firing back immediately, and this is like a seven, not a not a 720, a 180 of who he used to be when he first came into the game. Against Joe Pyfer, that hesitation matters because Pyfer is the type of fighter who, if he smells damage, he's not resetting. He's going to swarm you. So the question isn't whether Joe Pyfer can actually hurt Adesanya. It's what happens after. You know, can Adesanya stay composed and recover, or does Pyfer capitalize in that moment? And that's I think that's when this fight can flip instantly. Let's talk about the key factors. The first one I want to talk about is Pyfer's footwork. He's a bit flat-footed. You know, it's not just slow feet. Like Joe Pyfer doesn't have slow feet. I wouldn't say it's more so a heavy base. Planting hard to throw power. He's not someone with a lot of bounce or lateral resets. He's someone who more so tends to follow and not cut angles consistently, and that I think that creates a weapon for some fights and a liability for others. Against a guy like Izzy, I think this is a liability because Izzy lives off guys like that. You know, if you're flat-footed, you're easier to read, your entries are more predictable, and you struggle to adjust mid-exchange, and that just plays directly into Izzy's strengths. Except, bro, you could really expect to see a lot of pull counters, check hooks, kicks at range, while Joe Pyfer has his feet dug into the canvas. So the real question for Pyfer isn't just pressure; it's more so how he applies it. Can he actually cut the cage, or is he just gonna follow Izzy around? Because if he's just following Izzy around, he's gonna lose minutes. But if he can trap him, force exchanges, and make this a dogfight, I think that's where he becomes really dangerous. Let's talk about the keys to victories for Adesanya. This fight is simply about discipline. He needs to stay composed early, establish his jab, control the distance, keep Pyfer at bay. He has to attack that lead leg, slow Pyfer down, and make him pay for every single entry. But most importantly, he cannot fight with ego. He can't have unnecessary exchanges. No standing, no standing his ground just to prove his point. The longer this fight goes on, though, I think the more I favor Izzy. For Pyfer, the window is smaller, but it's definitely there. He needs to start fast, but not reckless. He has to use his feints to create openings. He can't just force them. He has to cut the cage off. He has to take away space and just make the whole fight uncomfortable immediately. His whole goal needs to be trying to make this what are those little things? Those little things, a phone booth. He needs to make this a phone booth fight. That's what he needs to do to win this fight. Let's go over some essential questions for both of these guys because I think the essential questions are, pretty clear. Pretty clear based off what we were saying. For Izzy, it's just, can he handle danger early? Can he handle danger early and still stay composed? What I mean by that is not can he survive. That's not at all what I'm asking. I'm more so asking how does he actually react in those moments? Because early in his career, like I said earlier, if he got hurt, he would fire back almost immediately. He trusted his offense even under pressure. But more recently, like I said, when he gets put in danger, he's shown the tendency to get more and more defensive, shell up, and just retreat and reset. So the real question is, does Izzy stay composed to make the fight, where he wants it to be, and make the right reads under pressure, or does he give Pyfer that window to build up momentum and potentially knock him out? So very curious to see if Izzy can establish his range before he takes any damage. Like, everything Izzy does is just, it starts with distance. His jab, his feints, his counters. They all depend on him being in control of the range. I think if he's able to establish that early, the fight just slows down and it leans in his favor. But I think if Pyfer gets to him first and he's forcing exchanges before Izzy has made those reads, then Izzy is going to have to fight out of rhythm. And that's when he becomes very, very, very hittable. Pyfer, the questions are mostly just distance management based. The first one being, can he cut the cage off against an elite mover? This is probably the most technical question of this whole fight. You know, it's one thing to pressure forward. It's another thing to actually control where the fight takes place. If Pyfer is just walking forward in straight lines, Izzy's gonna circle, he's gonna reset, and just pick him apart. But I think if Pyfer can angle off, take away exits, and trap him near the fence, that's when his pressure actually becomes effective. So it's not about how aggressive he is, it's more so how controlled that aggression is. Next one I have for him is, can he create openings instead of just forcing them? A lot of power punchers fall into this trap. They rely solely on their power to make things happen instead of setting things up. We've seen this a lot in that first fight with Francis Ngannou and Stipe. You know, against a striker as skilled as Izzy, that's a mistake. If you're just going to be throwing big shots with no setup, you're giving him exactly what he wants, predictable entries that he can easily counter. Pyfer has to use his feints. He has to use level changes and variation to actually create those openings. Otherwise, he's just going to be swinging at air and lose rounds. The last question I have for Joe Pyfer is, if he hurts Adesanya, can he actually finish him? This is one of the biggest swing factors in this fight, because hurting someone like Izzy, that's one thing, but finishing him, that's a completely different game. It takes real composure, knowing, when to go all in and when to stay controlled. If Pyfer gets that moment and he wastes it by being sloppy and going all out, even when Izzy is blocking his shots, that's just not it's not good. Like, if he's just sloppy and overextends, that could be his only chance right there gone. But if he's sharp in that moment and he picks his shots, and keeps the pressure on without losing control, and this fight can flip instantly. You put all that together, predicting this fight really just comes down to who do you think imposes their fight first and who handles that moment better when things get uncomfortable for them. Early on, this is a real test for Israel Adesanya. If Pyfer can, come out aggressive, but not too aggressive, if he can cut off the cage, if he can land something meaningful in that first round, that could be very dangerous, very, very fast. That window right there, that's where Pyfer has his best chance to completely change the fight, or even worse, if you're an Izzy fan, end it. The longer this fight goes, the more it starts to favor Adesanya, and that's where his experience and his composure and just his overall ability to make adjustments start to show. Once he gets those reads and he establishes his range, the fight starts to slow down for him, and that's exactly where he's at his best. And, that's just the difference for me. I trust Izzy to make those adjustments over time more than I trust Joe Pyfer to maintain that level of pressure in a smart, controlled way for multiple rounds. I don't think Joe Pyfer cuts off the cage consistently enough, and I don't think he stays disciplined enough if the fight extends. So my prediction is Adesanya survives the early pressure, then he starts finding his timing and begins to take over as the fight goes on. I see him either winning this as a clear, unanimous decision, or potentially he could really get a late TKO once Pyfer starts to slow down. So, yeah, man, let me know how you see this fight playing out, because this is one of those matchups where the results may not look obvious until, they get in the cage and it's like, okay, yeah, I see it now. But, yeah, man, just drop your predictions in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.